I was just trying to make breakfast when my daughter-in-law pushed me out of my own kitchen and told me I was too old to matter. The words hit me harder than the shove. I stood in the hallway, staring at the doorway like it was a wall between who I used to be and what I'd become. My hands wanted to shake, but I held them still. Then I heard the front door open, and when I saw who walked in next, I knew things in this house were about to change for good. The smell of eggs still lingered in the air, mixed with burnt toast and something sour from the garbage can. I could hear her moving around, humming to herself like she owned the place. Every sound reminded me that I no longer had a space in my own kitchen. I leaned against the wall, thinking of all the years I'd spent feeding this family, keeping the lights on, keeping peace. All that work, and now I was treated like an old guest, overstaying her welcome. The ache inside me grew heavier with each passing second. I walked out to the porch, needing air more than pride. The morning sun hit my face, soft but empty. This neighborhood used to be full of noise. Kids running, people waving. Now most houses had locked gates, and the quiet made me feel older than I was. I thought about calling my son outside. But what would I even say? That his wife had just pushed me out of the kitchen, that I was tired of being invisible in the home I built for him. The words sat in my throat, unspoken and bitter. I looked at my hands, the same ones that once held him as a baby, now resting uselessly in my lap. I wondered when I started fading into the background of my own life. Maybe it happened slowly, through all those small moments when I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I used to believe silence meant strength, but now it just felt like surrender. Inside, I heard her laugh again, loud and careless. Something about that laugh made me feel like I didn't exist at all. I closed my eyes, trying not to break. Memories came like waves, soft at first, then sharp. Sunday dinners when the whole family would gather, the smell of baked chicken and collard greens filling every room. My son would always come to me for seconds, smiling big. Those days, I mattered. Those days, this house had heart. I opened my eyes, and all that warmth was gone. The kitchen I once ruled had become her stage, her space. I could feel anger mixing with sadness, two things that don't belong together, but often show up hand in hand. I stepped back inside and stood near the hallway, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. She was talking on the phone now, her tone bright and proud. I caught a few words about how things were changing for the better. Maybe she meant the house. Maybe she meant getting rid of me one room at a time. I tried not to listen, but her voice carried. It wasn't just the words, it was how easy they came out, like I was already gone. I turned away, pressing my hand to my chest. The hallway mirror caught my reflection, and I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Lines I'd ignored before looked deeper, eyes more tired than I remembered. I used to wear color, lipstick, earrings. Now I dressed for comfort, not care. Maybe she saw that and thought it meant weakness. Maybe I'd let her think that. My late husband used to say I could quiet a storm with just a look, but somewhere along the way I stopped looking up. Maybe today was the day I needed to remember who I was. I walked to the kitchen doorway and looked in. She had her back turned, stirring a pot like she owned the world. The sound of her bracelets clinking against the spoon grated on me. I could see she'd rearranged my spice rack again. Every label faced forward, just how she liked it. My son stood nearby, scrolling his phone, not noticing any of it. I wanted to speak, to claim my space again, but something in me stopped. I told myself to wait, to stay calm, even though my silence was eating me alive. Outside, a car drove by playing gospel music, and for a second, I almost smiled. That kind of sound used to fill our home every morning. I took it as a small sign, something to keep me steady. I went to the counter and poured myself some water, trying to pretend everything was normal. My daughter-in-law didn't even look my way. It wasn't the first time she ignored me, but this one felt final, like a line had been drawn that couldn't be erased. I drank the water slowly, feeling each swallow as its own battle. I noticed something on the counter, half hidden under a towel. A cake box. My name was written on it in faded blue icing. My birthday had been yesterday. Nobody remembered. I opened the box and saw the cake still sitting there, untouched, except for one candle that had melted sideways. I laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because it hurt too much not to. I cut a slice and took a bite right there in the quiet, cold sweetness mixing with the taste of forgotten. It was the loneliest kind of sweet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that small piece of cake like it was proof I still existed. The house made soft sounds, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, but everything felt far away. I thought about my mother, how she'd raised me to keep my head high no matter what. Patience is strength, she'd say. But sitting there, I wondered if patience was just another word for being ignored. I felt the urge to call her, to hear her voice, but pride kept my hands still on the table. Then I heard it. Faint, but clear. A bell ringing somewhere far off. Not a phone, not a doorbell, but something old, like a church bell carried on the wind. It didn't belong here, not in this quiet street. The sound made me sit up straighter, unsure why it felt familiar. It reminded me of home, of Georgia, of mornings where my mama would ring the little brass bell to wake us for breakfast. I looked around, half expecting her to walk in right then. The thought brought a strange kind of comfort and warning all at once. I pushed the cake box aside and stood up. The sound of the bell faded, leaving a stillness that wasn't empty, just waiting. I walked toward the front door, needing fresh air. Outside, the mail truck stopped by the curb. The driver slipped something through the slot and drove off. I bent to pick it up, and my eyes narrowed. The envelope had no name, no return address, just a single smudge that looked like a thumbprint. The paper felt warm, almost alive in my hands. I turned it over again, unsure if I wanted to open it. I carried the letter back to the porch and sat in my old rocking chair. The sky looked pale, and the first hint of clouds was forming. I traced the edge of the envelope, feeling my pulse calm just from the motion. There was something about it that felt personal, even though there was no name. Maybe it was the handwriting, old-fashioned cursive, the kind you don't see much anymore. For a second, I thought it might be from someone who remembered me. That thought alone felt like a small miracle. Inside, I heard voices again, my son and his wife talking. The tone was low, but my name floated through the air like a dart. I knew that kind of whispering. It was the kind that comes when people think you're too far to hear. I held the letter tighter. I wanted to walk in and remind them whose name was still on this house deed. But something in me said, wait. Sometimes silence teaches louder lessons than shouting. Still, a part of me wanted someone, anyone, to stand up for me. I looked at the driveway and noticed an old car turning in. My breath caught when I saw the shape of it. Long and familiar, silver gray with a dent on the left bumper. My mama's Cadillac. She hadn't been here in months, and I hadn't even called her. The engine turned off, and I could see her inside, fixing her hat in the mirror like she was getting ready for church. I stood up, confused, but hopeful. Something told me that letter, that bell, and her timing weren't a coincidence. The past was walking straight to my door. She stepped out of the car like she owned the ground beneath her feet. My mama never needed to announce herself. The air always seemed to do it for her. Her church hat was tilted just so, and her walking stick tapped the driveway like a drumbeat of purpose. I stood frozen on the porch, half ashamed for not calling her, half grateful she'd come. She didn't wave or smile, just looked at me, head slightly tilted. That was her way of saying she already knew something was wrong before I ever opened my mouth. She came closer, slow but steady, her perfume trailing behind like memory itself. When she reached the steps, she took my hands in hers. Those same hands that raised me felt smaller now but no less powerful. She studied my face for a long moment, eyes sharp as always. Then she nodded once, turned her gaze toward the front door, and started walking. My voice caught before I could even speak. I knew better than to stop her. If my mama had decided she was going inside, then inside she was going. The door creaked open before she even touched it. My daughter-in-law must have heard her coming because I could see her standing near the stove, wiping her hands on a towel. My mama didn't pause. She walked right past me, eyes fixed on that kitchen like she was reclaiming holy ground. I followed behind, heart pounding, unsure what would happen next. The air in that kitchen changed the moment she crossed the threshold. Even the clock ticking on the wall sounded louder, like it knew something important was about to unfold. My son appeared from the hallway, phone still in his hand, looking surprised. He hadn't seen his grandmother in almost a year. He started to say something, but the look on her face stopped him cold. She scanned the room like she was counting sins and blessings. Then her eyes landed on the counter, where the half-eaten birthday cake still sat. She didn't speak, just raised one eyebrow, and that alone said more than words ever could. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably, realizing this was not going to be a normal morning. Mama set her purse down on the counter and straightened her shoulders. It was strange how small the kitchen felt with her in it, even though she wasn't a big woman. She looked at me briefly, and I felt like a child again, waiting to be told what to do. Then she turned her gaze on my daughter-in-law, her expression calm but sharp. There was no shouting, no anger, just quiet power. You could feel every generation in her voice when she finally spoke, reminding everyone whose house this truly was. My daughter-in-law tried to stand tall, but her body betrayed her. She kept folding and unfolding the towel in her hands, her confidence slipping with each crease. Mama walked to the stove, lifted the lid off a pot, and sniffed. She didn't say a word, just put the lid back on and turned off the burner. My son mumbled something about breakfast, but Mama ignored him. She looked at me, then back at his wife. It was clear she wasn't here for food. She was here for something bigger, something overdue. I felt torn standing there, half relieved and half afraid. Mama had always been my shield, but she was also a mirror. Whenever she came around, I had to face truths I liked to hide. My daughter-in-law leaned against the counter, trying to seem unbothered, but her eyes darted around the room like she was looking for a way out. My son rubbed his forehead, pretending to scroll on his phone. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The quiet was thick, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that changes everything. Mama turned toward the table and tapped her walking stick twice against the floor. That sound cut through every noise, even the hum of the refrigerator. Then she started talking, not in anger, but in a tone that carried both history and weight. She spoke about respect, about roots, about how a house becomes a home only when the ones who built it are honored. My daughter-in-law didn't interrupt. Neither did I. My mama's voice had that way of reminding people who they were before they started forgetting. Even the air felt different. She walked over to the wall where our family photos hung. Her finger traced along the frames, birthdays, graduations, my wedding, my husband in his uniform. She stopped at one photo of me holding my baby boy. She tapped the glass and smiled softly. "He grew up strong," she said, more to herself than anyone else. My son looked down. My daughter-in-law stared at the floor. Mama's eyes didn't accuse. They remembered, and remembering was its own kind of judgment. I felt my throat tighten, but I held my chin high, letting her words settle. Mama finally sat at the kitchen table, folded her hands and waited. That was her way of saying it was time for the truth to come out. My son sighed, setting his phone down, and said things had just been tense lately. My daughter-in-law looked away. I stayed quiet. Mama nodded slowly, listening, but not letting him off the hook. She had a gift for silence. It made people say more than they planned to. I could see my son's guilt creeping through his posture. This wasn't going to be a quick visit anymore. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast and something else, like dust, after rain. I noticed the clock on the wall had stopped ticking. It was strange because that clock had run for 20 years without missing a beat. Mama noticed it too. She tilted her head, murmured something I couldn't hear, then looked toward me. Her eyes were full of understanding, like she knew there were things breaking here that had nothing to do with clocks. The silence stretched, and I knew she wasn't going to let me hide behind patience this time. I reached into my robe pocket and felt the envelope again. It was still warm, even though I'd been holding it for a while. I wanted to show Mama, but something made me hesitate. It felt personal, almost sacred. My daughter-in-law started fidgeting again, tapping her nails against the counter. Mama turned her attention back to her, asking her how she liked living here. The question was simple, but the meaning behind it was sharp. The young woman shrugged, saying it was fine, but you could tell fine was far from true. Mama nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer. She said nothing else, just stood and started tidying the table, folding napkins, straightening chairs, setting things right, in quiet rebellion. My daughter-in-law watched her every move, unsure what to do. My son muttered something about needing to check on a call and slipped out of the room. Coward, I thought, but kept my face still. Mama looked at me again, eyes narrowing. That look said it all. She hadn't come here just to talk. She'd come to restore something this house had lost. The tension in the room felt heavy, yet my heart felt strangely calm. Mama's presence had always done that, brought chaos and comfort at the same time. She started asking small questions, like what I'd cooked lately, what plants I'd kept alive. I told her the garden was dry. She frowned, saying that wasn't like me. My daughter-in-law cleared her throat, saying she'd been too busy to water anything. Mama smiled politely, but her eyes stayed sharp. I could tell she was filing that answer away, like a piece of evidence for later. Mama got up again, moving slower now, but with intention. She picked up the cake box, looked inside, and then back at me. "Did anyone celebrate this?" she asked. I shook my head. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. My daughter-in-law looked embarrassed. My son nowhere in sight. Mama put the lid back on the box, slid it toward the center of the table, and said softly that forgetting someone's birthday doesn't erase their worth. I felt tears sting my eyes. She'd said what I'd been holding in for months. Mama turned to me then, voice gentler than I'd expected. She said she was proud of me for holding my peace, but warned that silence can sometimes starve the spirit. Her words hit deep. She told me it was time to remember who I was before life got quiet. Her tone wasn't scolding, it was permission. She said some lessons don't need shouting, just witnessing. Then she looked right at my daughter-in-law, who shifted under the weight of it. For the first time, I felt like maybe I didn't have to disappear anymore. I thought about the people listening, about how stories like mine live in so many homes. I felt a strange need to share, to reach through the years. I spoke softly, saying that sometimes peace looks like silence, but feels like drowning. And if anyone hearing my story has ever felt invisible in their own home, they should stay with me now, because what came next changed everything. I wanted them to know it wasn't just a story about anger, it was about remembering worth before it's too late. That thought steadied me again. Mama sat back, watching my daughter-in-law carefully. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm as she said that respect isn't owed, it's earned through how you treat people who've made your path easier. My daughter-in-law's lip trembled slightly, but she stayed quiet. I could tell something inside her was shifting, even if pride wouldn't let it show. Mama turned to the stove, opened another pot, and shook her head. "You don't rush soul food," she said under her breath. I smiled faintly. That was her way of saying love takes time, even in correction. My son walked back in, holding his phone like it could protect him. He looked between us, unsure whose side to stand on. Mama didn't give him the chance to decide. She asked him where his loyalty rested, in comfort or in truth. He didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years, he looked like my little boy again, caught between guilt and love. I wanted to step in, but I knew this was his moment to face the truth without my protection. He needed to feel it. Mama pointed at the burnt pan on the stove. She said a kitchen tells on its owner. If the food burns often, something else in the house is being neglected. I didn't know if she meant me or my daughter-in-law, but maybe she meant both. My daughter-in-law looked at the pan, her face softening, realizing what Mama was really saying. This wasn't about cooking, it was about care, about taking time to tend to what feeds everyone. Mama sat down again, quiet but commanding. The lesson had already landed where it needed to. The clock on the wall started ticking again, without anyone touching it. The sound filled the silence, steady and certain. My mama looked up, noticed, and smiled faintly. "Some things just need attention to start working again," she said, tapping her walking stick twice on the floor. My daughter-in-law turned away, blinking fast. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. For a second, the tension lifted, replaced by something like peace. But deep down, I knew we weren't finished yet. The real truth was still waiting to be spoken. Mama turned to me, asking where I kept my old photo albums. I pointed toward the hallway closet. She sent my son to fetch them, and he went without question. When he came back, she opened one and spread the pictures across the table. Baby showers, birthdays, graduations, every image a piece of proof that this house had heart long before anyone new stepped inside it. My daughter-in-law leaned closer, curiosity softening her face. I watched her eyes linger on pictures of me young, confident, laughing. Maybe she finally saw the woman beneath the title. Mama began telling stories behind each photo, how I worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, how I saved every extra dollar to buy this house. She spoke like she was reading scripture, steady and proud. My son's eyes filled with quiet guilt. My daughter-in-law's expression turned thoughtful. I didn't interrupt. I just watched as the truth worked its slow magic through memory. Every story Mama told felt like planting seeds again in soil that had gone dry. The more she spoke, the more alive the house began to feel. Mama stopped talking for a moment, picked up one photo that had a tear down the middle. It was me and my husband on our wedding day. She smiled at it, then at me. "He'd be proud," she whispered. My chest tightened at those words. My daughter-in-law looked down, and I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Regret, maybe even shame. It wasn't cruel, it was human. Mama reached for my hand under the table, squeezed it once. It was her way of saying the storm was breaking, even if the clouds hadn't cleared yet. The air felt lighter, though the truth still hung between us. Mama looked at my son and his wife and said gently that families lose themselves, not through fights but through forgetting. Forgetting birthdays, stories, the people who built the walls they live in. My daughter-in-law nodded slowly. My son looked at her, then at me, finally understanding something words alone couldn't teach. Mama stood up, steadying herself with her cane. She said the house was ready to breathe again, and in that moment, it truly felt like it was. Mama sat back down, resting both hands on her cane. Her voice softened as she said that a home without respect loses its soul one quiet day at a time. My daughter-in-law looked down at her hands, her wedding ring glinting under the kitchen light. I saw her breathing change, like something heavy was lifting off her chest, but she didn't know what to do with the space left behind. My son leaned against the counter, nodding quietly. Mama had a way of reaching people without shouting, and that's what made her words stick. I looked toward the window and saw the clouds gathering again. The light dimmed, soft and gray, the kind of sky that made you want to listen more than speak. Mama began humming under her breath, a church tune older than me. I remembered her singing it when I was a child, sweeping floors, holding life together with song and strength. My daughter-in-law's eyes flicked toward her, curious. The song filled the room like something alive. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest, like truth had found a voice it could rest in. Mama reached for the cake box again and cut 3 slices, one for each of us. She handed them out like communion, slow and deliberate. No one spoke as we ate. The sweetness felt different this time, not bitter or lonely. My daughter-in-law finally said the cake was good. Mama nodded, saying good things only stay good when shared. My son smiled weakly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. I didn't realize how much I'd missed moments like this. Small, quiet peace after a storm that hadn't even fully passed yet. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The ticking clock, the soft hum of the fridge, the faint sound of gospel from a distant radio outside, it all mixed into a rhythm that felt like life settling again. Mama looked at me and said that patience is a blessing, but it's not meant to bury your voice. Her words landed heavy. I'd been quiet for too long, thinking it was the only way to keep love alive. Maybe it was time to speak, not to fight, but to remind everyone who I still was. I stood up, not with anger, but with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. My son looked up, unsure of what I was about to say. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened slightly. I told them both that I loved them, but love doesn't erase disrespect. It was strange how calm I sounded, even to myself. Mama gave a small nod from the table, proud but silent. My daughter-in-law started to apologize, words tumbling but unsure. I stopped her with a look. It wasn't about apology anymore. It was about understanding what lines should never be crossed. My son finally spoke, his voice rough and tired. He said things had been hard lately. Money, work, pressure. He said they'd both been taking it out on the wrong person. I listened without interrupting. Mama said that pain travels like water. If you don't contain it, it floods whoever's nearest. My daughter-in-law wiped her eyes, nodding faintly. I felt something loosen inside me. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the start of it. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing you don't want to carry the same weight anymore. Mama stood up again, her cane tapping against the floor. She said she needed air. We followed her outside to the porch. The wind had picked up, cool and earthy, carrying that smell of rain that feels both old and new. She looked up at the sky and smiled like she recognized it. The clouds were darkening, but she didn't seem worried. My daughter-in-law wrapped her arms around herself, watching Mama with quiet curiosity. My son stood beside me, his shoulders no longer hunched. It felt like the beginning of something fragile but good. Mama looked down the street, then back at me. She said a house isn't healed in a day. It's healed when hearts remember their place. Her voice was low, but it carried enough to reach all of us. The letter in my pocket pressed against my hip. I'd almost forgotten it in all the talking. I took it out and showed Mama. She frowned when she saw there was no name. She turned it over in her hands, then looked at me. "Where'd this come from?" she asked softly. I told her I didn't know. Mama rubbed the corner of the envelope like she could feel something inside it beyond paper. "Feels familiar," she whispered. I didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it gave me chills. My daughter-in-law leaned closer, curious. I finally opened it, careful not to tear the edges. Inside was a single folded page. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes catching on handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was my late husband's. His neat, steady pen marks spelled out one short sentence: "Keep the fire burning." I nearly dropped the letter. My son gasped when I said the words aloud. Mama's eyes welled up, though she didn't cry. My daughter-in-law covered her mouth. None of us knew how to explain it. My husband had been gone for over a decade, and yet here was his handwriting clear as day. The paper even smelled faintly of his cologne. Mama said softly that some messages wait until the right ears are ready to hear them. I didn't know what to make of that, but the words on the page started to echo in my chest like a heartbeat. We went back inside without talking. The house felt alive again, every sound amplified, the floor creaking, the wind brushing against the windows, the clock ticking steadily. Mama sat back at the table, still holding the letter. My daughter-in-law poured water for everyone, her hands trembling slightly. No one touched their glasses. Mama folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me, saying it belonged to the one who kept the fire burning all those years. I pressed it to my heart, realizing maybe this was my husband's way of reminding me who I used to be. The rain started, soft but steady, tapping against the windows in a rhythm that almost sounded like that same church bell from earlier. I wondered if I was hearing things, but Mama tilted her head too. "You hear that?" she asked. I nodded. My daughter-in-law said she heard it too, though she'd never heard anything like it before. We sat there in silence, listening. The sound was distant but warm, like an invitation. I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't scare me. It felt like something right had finally found its way home. My daughter-in-law stood up first, walking to the stove. She picked up a dish rag and began wiping the counter. It was a small thing, but it felt big. She looked over her shoulder and asked if she could finish making breakfast. I said yes. My son joined her, reaching for plates. It was awkward at first, but something about their quiet teamwork felt healing. Mama watched, nodding slightly. She said sometimes peace doesn't come through words, it comes through hands doing right. For the first time in weeks, the smell of food in that kitchen felt like love again. I helped too, stirring the eggs and adding salt the way my husband used to like. My daughter-in-law watched and copied each step. She even smiled when she got it right. The sound of sizzling filled the air, warm and steady. Mama began humming again, her song blending with the noise of cooking. It was strange how something so simple could feel sacred. My son leaned down to kiss the top of my head. I didn't say anything, but that one gesture said more than any apology could. The kitchen felt whole again. As we ate, Mama told another story, this one about my grandmother, who once refused to leave her home when a storm came because she said her roots were too deep to wash away. My daughter-in-law listened closely, her eyes soft. Mama said, "A family is like that too. You can argue, drift, or forget, but the roots will still hold if you remember where they are." I saw my son glance at his wife, and she nodded slightly. I felt a quiet pride bloom inside me. The roots weren't gone, they just needed tending. When breakfast ended, the table was a mess. Crumbs, dishes, spills, but no one minded. Mama stood up and said messes mean life is happening again. She reached for her cane and looked around the room, satisfied. I noticed the candle on the counter flickering though no one had lit it. It glowed steady, golden, as if someone unseen was still watching over us. Mama noticed too, but didn't comment. She just smiled and whispered, "Good." That single word felt like a blessing, sealing everything that had been broken just a few hours before. We started cleaning together, moving around each other in quiet rhythm. I wiped the table while my daughter-in-law washed dishes. My son dried them, careful not to chip anything. Mama sat nearby, watching, humming softly. Every motion felt meaningful, like rebuilding something piece by piece. The smell of rain drifted in through the open window, mixing with soap and coffee. I glanced at the letter on the table and thought about my husband's words again. Maybe keeping the fire burning didn't just mean surviving, it meant teaching others how to tend it too. When the dishes were done, Mama stood and stretched. She said she needed to rest her legs. My son offered her the recliner, and she accepted, still sharp but tired. My daughter-in-law sat beside her on the couch, fidgeting with her ring. Mama took her hand and said something softly I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it made the younger woman's eyes shine with tears. I didn't need to know the words. Some lessons are between women, passed down in silence. I watched them, realizing love looks different at every age, but it's all the same root. I stepped outside for a minute, breathing in the fresh rain. The driveway glistened like glass, puddles reflecting bits of sky. I could hear birds starting to sing again. The air was cool against my face, clean and new. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of my age, proud of my scars, proud of my patience. Mama had reminded me that surviving doesn't mean shrinking. I looked back through the screen door and saw my family sitting together. They looked small in that big room, but whole. That was enough for me. The church bell sound returned, faint but clear, rolling through the air like memory. I closed my eyes and listened. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a promise. I whispered, "Thank you," not knowing exactly who I was thanking. Maybe Mama, maybe my husband, maybe the part of myself I'd finally found again. The bell faded, leaving a calm I didn't want to lose. I went back inside, wiping rain from my hair. The candle was still burning. Mama looked at me and said, "You ready to cook my cornbread recipe?" I smiled and nodded. We gathered the ingredients, like it was a family event. Mama gave directions from her chair, voice firm but kind. My daughter-in-law followed closely, eager to get it right. My son mixed the batter, laughing when flour dusted his shirt. It felt like the old days again, messy, warm, alive. Mama said every good recipe carries history. I thought about how many hands had stirred this same mix before mine. I watched my daughter-in-law smile as she poured it into the pan. Maybe this was how families healed, not through speeches, but through shared bread and time. The smell of cornbread filled the house, rich and comforting. I leaned against the counter, breathing it in. My husband had always loved that smell. It reminded him of home. I wondered if he'd sent that letter just for this moment. Mama sat quietly, eyes half closed, humming again. My daughter-in-law peeked into the oven and grinned when she saw it rising perfectly. My son set the table for lunch, careful with each plate. It was strange how peace could grow in the same space where pain once lived. The warmth felt like forgiveness baking slow. The timer dinged, and I pulled the pan out. The golden crust looked perfect. Mama tapped her cane against the floor twice in approval. I cut a small square and handed it to her first. She tasted it, smiled, and said, "The fire's burning again." I looked at my daughter-in-law, who smiled too, her eyes soft and full. My son reached for another piece, laughing quietly. I felt tears rising but didn't hide them. They weren't sad tears. They were the kind that come when you finally remember what family is supposed to feel like. Mama leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She told my son to take care of what's sacred, because sacred things don't shout, they whisper. I saw him nod, holding his wife's hand. My daughter-in-law looked at me and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I nodded. No need to say anything back. Mama's cane rested against the table, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. She looked around the room and smiled. "Feels like home again," she said softly. For the first time that day, I believed it too. Even the walls seemed to breathe a little easier. Rain still tapped lightly outside, steady as a heartbeat. I looked around at my family, gathered close, and felt a quiet peace settle deep in my chest. The candle flame flickered once, then steadied, its glow soft and calm. Mama closed her eyes for a short nap, her face peaceful. My son and his wife whispered softly to each other, voices gentle now. I folded the letter again and slipped it into my pocket, right over my heart. Whatever had been broken here didn't feel broken anymore. It just felt lived in and still burning. Later that afternoon, the rain stopped and sunlight spilled through the windows in soft streaks. The house smelled like cornbread, soap, and peace. Mama was still resting in the recliner, her breathing slow and steady. My daughter-in-law sat near her feet, flipping through one of my old photo albums. My son was outside fixing the loose porch step like he'd been meaning to for months. I stood in the doorway watching them all, a quiet warmth growing inside me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own home. I went into the kitchen and started cleaning the last few dishes. The water was warm, the rhythm of scrubbing calm and steady. My reflection in the window looked softer somehow, less tired. I could still hear Mama's faint humming in the background. My daughter-in-law joined me after a while. Drying each dish carefully, she didn't say much, just stayed beside me, and that was enough. Sometimes healing doesn't need words, it just needs presence. The quiet between us felt easy now, not heavy. I realized forgiveness doesn't always sound like something, it just feels like peace returning. When we finished, my daughter-in-law asked about the garden. I told her it had gone dry since I stopped tending to it. She said she'd help me bring it back. The offer was simple, but it meant everything. I grabbed my hat, and we stepped outside together. The air smelled fresh, the grass glistening after the rain. The soil looked thirsty but ready. She picked up a small trowel and started digging beside me. For the first time, we worked side by side. No tension, no competition, just two women rebuilding something that had quietly died but wasn't gone. As we worked, I told her how my husband and I planted that garden years ago. Every flower had a story, every row a memory. She listened closely, asking small questions. I could see understanding growing in her eyes. Maybe she hadn't known what this home meant, how much history it held. Sometimes people disrespect what they don't understand. Maybe that's what had happened between us. I realized she wasn't cruel. She was young and afraid of being overlooked. And maybe I'd been afraid too, clinging so tightly to my place that I forgot to share it. We planted 3 new seeds together before heading back inside. My son had already put the tools away, smiling when he saw us walking side by side. Mama had woken up by then, sipping tea in her chair. She looked at us both and said, "Looks like the roots are taking again." My daughter-in-law smiled shyly, nodding. I sat down beside Mama, handing her the letter again. She unfolded it one last time and placed it on her lap. The sunlight caught the ink just right, making it glow faintly, like it was alive. Mama said she'd been thinking about that letter. She believed my husband wanted us to keep the fire burning, not just in memory, but in spirit, to remind us that warmth only lives when it's passed on. She told me to stop hiding my strength and to let others learn from it while I'm still here. Her words were gentle but sharp. My daughter-in-law looked down, realizing those lessons weren't just for me, they were for her too. I nodded quietly, feeling that deep truth settle in. The fire wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for light. Later, as the day turned gold, Mama asked for her shawl. I draped it over her shoulders, the same one she'd worn to every important family gathering for years. She said she felt her mother near whenever she wore it. I knew what she meant. The room felt full, like the past and present were sitting together again. My son brought her another cup of tea, and she smiled at him, saying he finally looked like the man she knew he could be. He didn't answer, just sat near her feet, quiet and grateful. I looked around the living room, the photos, the soft hum of life returning, and felt a deep calm I hadn't known in years. The sound of that faint bell returned, softer now, almost like a heartbeat. I knew it wasn't from outside. It was something within this house, or maybe within us. Mama looked up too, her eyes soft but alert. "You hear it too?" she asked. I nodded. My daughter-in-law said it sounded peaceful this time. Mama smiled and said, "Then we're listening right." I didn't understand it all, but I felt it deeply. The evening came quietly. The light dimmed, and the air outside turned cooler. We lit candles around the living room, letting their glow soften everything. Mama began telling one last story about her first home, a small cabin with no running water, but plenty of laughter. She said she learned then that comfort doesn't come from things. It comes from belonging. My daughter-in-law listened like a student. I sat beside Mama, holding her hand. Every word she spoke felt like planting another seed, something that would grow long after she was gone. The clock chimed softly, marking another hour, steady and sure. I hadn't realized how long it had been since the house felt alive at this hour. Usually by now everyone was in separate rooms, quiet and distant. Tonight, the walls carried laughter again. Small, real laughter that came from healing. My son brought out the cornbread leftovers, and we ate it warm with honey. Mama said sweet food after storms means blessings ahead. I smiled, thinking maybe that was true. Maybe every hard moment had led us right here to this small, perfect peace. As night settled, Mama said she wanted to sit outside a while. We helped her to the porch, wrapped in her shawl. The air was cool, the stars just starting to appear. Crickets chirped softly, filling the silence with life. My daughter-in-law sat on the steps. My son leaned against the post, and I stood behind Mama's chair. She said, "The world felt quiet in a good way tonight." Then she added, "Sometimes God stills things not to end them, but to let them listen." I didn't say anything, but I knew she was right. We all stayed there for a while, just breathing. The letter was still in my hand. I turned it over, running my thumb along the creases. The words "keep the fire burning" looked faint in the dim light, but they carried more weight than ever. Mama reached up and touched my arm. "You understand it now," she whispered. I nodded. Keeping the fire burning wasn't about holding on to pain. It was about keeping warmth alive, passing it forward. I folded the letter again and slipped it into my pocket, right next to my heart. A breeze passed through the porch, carrying the scent of rain-soaked grass and magnolia. Mama smiled, closing her eyes. "He's here," she murmured. My breath caught. I didn't need to ask who she meant. My daughter-in-law looked around, sensing something too. My son stood still, staring toward the garden. For a few moments, it felt like time stopped, like everything, past, present, love, regret, had gathered in one space, just to remind us that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. When the breeze faded, Mama opened her eyes again, calm and steady. We went back inside quietly, closing the door behind us. The candles flickered on the table, their flames bending as if touched by unseen fingers. Mama said it was time for bed. She kissed my forehead, then my son's, and told my daughter-in-law she was proud of her for staying. That small sentence meant more than any long speech. My daughter-in-law smiled through tears. I watched them both, realizing bridges weren't built by words but by grace. Mama headed toward the guest room slowly, her cane tapping soft against the floor like a lullaby. After she went to rest, my son and his wife started clearing the table. I told them to leave it, but they insisted. I stood watching as they worked together, quietly joking, bumping shoulders. It was simple, but it was new. My heart swelled a little at the sight. My son caught my eye and gave a small nod, like he understood what I'd been carrying all this time. My daughter-in-law smiled shyly at me, and I smiled back. For once, there was no pride, no distance, just quiet understanding between women. When the kitchen was clean again, I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden. The moonlight fell on the freshly planted soil, glimmering faintly. I imagined the seeds already starting to root, finding their place. That thought comforted me. Healing takes time, but growth begins the moment you decide to start again. My reflection in the glass didn't look old or forgotten anymore. It looked alive, like someone still becoming. I touched the glass gently and whispered a thank you to my husband, to Mama, and to whatever grace still watched over this home. The house was quiet now, just the sound of the clock ticking and the faint crackle of the candle's flame. I sat down at the table, alone for a moment, and opened the letter again. My hands didn't shake this time. I studied the handwriting, tracing each letter with care. There was a calm in me now that I hadn't known for years. I realized this letter wasn't a haunting, it was a reminder, a gift meant to show that even love lost can still teach. I smiled softly and folded it again, sealing the lesson in my heart. I went to check on Mama before heading to bed. She was asleep, the letter of her own folded in her lap, her breathing deep and peaceful. Her cane leaned against the wall, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I whispered goodnight and turned off the light. Standing there, I thought about all the times she'd carried me through storms I thought would never pass. Even now, at 78, she still carried this house, holding it steady until we found our footing again. I left the door cracked open just a little. In my room, I lit a small candle by the window. The light flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint creaks and sighs of the old house settling. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive, like it had been waiting for this kind of peace. I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for miracles, but for understanding. I was learning that sometimes grace doesn't shout. It just shows up as quiet strength when you least expect it. That was enough for me. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, thinking of my husband's smile, of Mama's strength, of the young woman who'd once pushed me out of the kitchen. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I just felt tired, but in a good way, the kind that comes after hard work that means something. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It felt like the whole house was breathing with me. For the first time in years, I drifted towards sleep without holding anything back. I woke in the middle of the night, to the faint glow of the candles still burning. It hadn't melted down much at all, though hours had passed. I got up, stretching my legs, and walked to the hallway. Mama's door was closed, but I could hear her soft snoring from inside. That sound made me smile. I peeked into the kitchen. The letter sat on the table, illuminated by the candlelight. It looked peaceful, like it belonged there. I thought about blowing out the candle, but decided against it. Some lights aren't meant to go out. I made myself a cup of tea, standing in the quiet, The moonlight mixed with the warm glow of the candle, turning the kitchen into something almost sacred. I sat down and sipped slowly, thinking of how much had changed in just a single day. The fights, the tears, the lessons, all of it had led here. I glanced at the window and thought I saw a shadow in the garden, tall and familiar. I didn't move, just smiled softly. Whether it was my husband or memory itself, I knew one thing for sure: love still lived here. The sound of footsteps made me turn. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. She said she couldn't sleep and asked to join me. I nodded, sliding a cup of tea toward her. We sat together in silence for a long time. The candle flame wavered between us, steady but alive. After a while, she said she wanted to do better, not just for me, but for the family. I told her she already was. Her eyes welled up, and I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Nothing more needed saying. We talked quietly until the tea grew cold. She told me about her childhood, about how she'd never had much family warmth growing up. I listened, realizing how much pain she'd carried in silence. Maybe that's why she'd lashed out before. Hurt people try to protect themselves before they even understand love. I told her she was safe here. Truly safe. She nodded, wiping her eyes. The candle flickered between us, its light wrapping the room in calm. In that moment, I knew something important had shifted. Respect wasn't demanded anymore. It was shared. When she finally went back to bed, I stayed behind, sitting alone at the table once more. The house was utterly still now, but it didn't feel empty. The letter, the candle, the faint scent of cornbread, all of it felt like company. I realized the fire my husband spoke of wasn't just love or strength. It was connection, the thing that keeps people from drifting too far from each other. I let out a slow breath, looked at the flame, and whispered, "Still burning." Then I turned off the light, letting the candle watch over the night. Morning came softly, sunlight, touching the curtains like a gentle reminder that life moves forward. The candle had burned itself out, leaving just a thin ring of wax on the table. I felt rested in a way I hadn't in years. When I walked into the kitchen, the smell of coffee filled the air. My son was already up, humming quietly as he poured 2 cups. He handed me one without a word, just a warm smile. Sometimes love speaks loudest in silence. I took a sip and felt that warmth spread all the way to my heart. I noticed the garden through the window, damp from the night's rain. Tiny shoots had already started pushing through the soil where we'd planted seeds yesterday. It was quick, almost unbelievable, but maybe that was the point. Growth doesn't wait for permission. It happens when it's ready. My daughter-in-law came in wearing her robe, hair tied up messily, eyes soft and kind. She looked like someone new. She thanked me for staying up with her last night. I told her it was no trouble. In truth, it had been one of the most healing talks I'd ever had. Mama walked in next, moving slower but still strong. Her shawl hung around her shoulders, and her smile had the kind of calm that comes only after storms. She asked if the coffee was fresh, and my son poured her a cup immediately. She sipped, nodded, and said, "Peace tastes better than bitterness." We all laughed softly. My daughter-in-law leaned against the counter, watching her like she was soaking in every word. Mama had that effect. She turned simple truth into scripture. Her presence alone was enough to keep the whole house steady and awake. We sat together at the table, sunlight spilling across our faces. Mama said, "Families are like bread dough. They rise when there's warmth, but fall when left cold." My daughter-in-law smiled at that, saying she understood now. My son reached for her hand under the table. I caught it out of the corner of my eye and pretended not to notice. It wasn't about pretending, it was about allowing, letting love rebuild quietly, where shouting once lived. Mama patted my hand, whispering, "See? Fire's catching." I nodded, tears pricking the corners of my eyes, but not falling. We ate breakfast together again, this time without tension. The eggs weren't burnt, and the laughter came easy. I told a story about my son as a child, how he once tried to fix the TV by hitting it with a spoon. My daughter-in-law laughed so hard, she almost spilled her coffee. Mama chuckled too, saying he'd always been stubborn but sweet. The sound filled the kitchen, bouncing off the walls like joy had been waiting years to come home. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was better than perfection could ever be. After breakfast, Mama told my son to bring her purse. She pulled out an old recipe card, yellowed around the edges, and handed it to me. It was written in her handwriting, neat and looping. "Your father loved this," she said. I looked closer. It was the same cornbread recipe from the letter, except for one line added at the bottom, "For when you forget who you are." My throat tightened. She said she'd written that note years ago and didn't know why. Maybe she'd been told to, in some way that wasn't hers to question. I folded the card carefully and held it close. That one sentence felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was building. My husband's words, Mama's wisdom, they met in that one message. I realized then that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about remembering who you are when you do. Mama said it was time for me to teach the younger ones that same truth, in my own way. My daughter-in-law nodded slowly, as if already waiting for lessons I hadn't yet spoken aloud. The moment felt sacred, quiet, and complete. Mama said she'd be heading home later that day. My son protested, saying she should stay longer, but she waved him off. "I came for what needed doing," she said simply. My daughter-in-law hugged her gently, whispering something I couldn't hear. Mama smiled, nodding in approval. I knew my mother. She didn't need thanks, just proof of change. She looked at me and said, "You're the fire now." I didn't answer, just squeezed her hand. She didn't need my words either. Between us, silence always carried more meaning than any sentence could. When Mama left, the house didn't feel emptier. It felt full, like her presence had settled into every corner. Her scent lingered in the air, soft and comforting. I walked to the porch to wave goodbye as her car pulled away. The old Cadillac rolled slow down the street, sun glinting off its hood. My son and daughter-in-law stood behind me, arms wrapped around each other. Watching her go, I realized she'd left more than advice behind. She'd left a rhythm, a way for this house to move forward again without falling apart. The heartbeat had returned. That afternoon, I decided to bake again, not for anyone else, but for myself. I put on my old apron, the one with a few stains that told stories of dinners past. My daughter-in-law joined me, ready to help. I let her take the lead this time. She measured, mixed, and asked questions, and I answered patiently. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about sharing what was mine, so it could become ours. The smell of vanilla filled the air, blending with laughter. I realized this was how tradition survived, passed not by age, but by love. While the cake baked, I took out the family album Mama had left open on the table. My daughter-in-law sat beside me, flipping through the pages. She pointed at an old picture of my wedding day, saying I looked strong. I told her strength looks different at every age. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's just standing still and letting time do its work. She nodded, tracing the edges of the photo. Her face softened in a way that told me she was seeing me not as competition, but as lineage, a continuation of something worth keeping. When the timer rang, I opened the oven, and the heat washed over my face. The cake had risen perfectly, golden brown with a faint crack through the middle. I laughed softly, saying imperfections make things real. My daughter-in-law smiled, saying she liked it better that way. We let it cool on the counter, the scent filling every room. My son walked in, sniffing the air, saying the house smelled like his childhood again. That made my heart swell. Maybe we'd finally rebuilt what had been broken, not through force, but through simple, shared moments. We sat down for coffee and cake, small slices on mismatched plates. The first bite melted in my mouth, warm and sweet. My daughter-in-law said it tasted like peace. I smiled, thinking how far we'd come in just one day. Mama's words echoed in my head. Keep the fire burning. I realized the fire wasn't in the kitchen or the candles. It was in the willingness to stay, to rebuild, to keep showing up, even when it hurts. I looked around at my family and knew we'd done just that. The warmth was real again. After lunch, I went to the garden again. The air was warm, and the soil smelled rich. I knelt down, brushing away the leaves. Tiny green sprouts had started breaking through, fragile but determined. My daughter-in-law came outside with a pitcher of water, smiling when she saw them. "They're already growing," she said. I nodded, taking the pitcher from her hands. "Everything grows when you stop pulling the roots," I told her. She laughed softly, understanding. Together we watered each row, watching the sunlight hit the new life like a quiet blessing. I found Mama's shawl still hanging on the porch chair, carried there by the wind. I picked it up and held it close, breathing in the faint scent of lavender. I folded it carefully and brought it inside, draping it over the back of her favorite chair. It felt right there, like it belonged. My son came in, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers from the store. He said he wanted to start keeping the table full again. I smiled and helped him place them in a vase. The colors brightened the whole room instantly. Later in the afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the light shift across the walls. The letter sat on the table beside me, folded neatly. I didn't feel the urge to open it anymore. I already knew what it said, what it meant. It had done its job. My daughter-in-law joined me, sitting quietly. We didn't speak, just shared the same view. The stillness wasn't empty. It was full of all the words we didn't need to say anymore. Sometimes peace doesn't make noise. It just stays, steady and kind. As evening came, we decided to cook dinner together again. My son grilled outside while I made rice and vegetables. My daughter-in-law handled the salad, chopping with care. The rhythm between us was easy now, like we'd been doing it for years. The air smelled like onions, herbs, and laughter. I caught her humming the same hymn Mama used to hum. I didn't correct her when she forgot a line. I just joined in softly. It wasn't about the words. It was about keeping that melody alive. The house had found its music again. We ate on the porch as the sky turned orange and pink. The air felt clean, touched by warmth that wasn't just weather, it was belonging. My son raised his glass, saying he wanted to make dinners like this a regular thing. My daughter-in-law agreed, smiling at me. I said nothing, just nodded with a full heart. The candle from the kitchen sat on the table between us, relit, its small flame steady against the breeze. That light felt like a promise, that no matter what storms came, this home would always find its way back to warmth. After dinner, my son and his wife went for a walk, leaving me alone with the quiet. I cleared the table slowly, not out of duty but out of habit. I'd missed. The candle flickered low, its light bouncing against the window glass. I thought about Mama driving back home, maybe humming to herself, proud but tired. I could almost hear her voice telling me to rest. I smiled and whispered back, "I will." The clock ticked steadily behind me, not rushed, not slow, just steady. That sound was enough to make me feel safe again. I walked through each room, turning off lights, touching small things that held big memories. A photograph, a worn quilt, an old ceramic bowl. Each object carried history, but none of it felt heavy anymore. It felt like home. In the hallway mirror, I saw my reflection and didn't flinch this time. I smiled softly. The lines on my face didn't bother me. They looked earned, not aged. I realized I wasn't invisible after all. I'd just forgotten how to look at myself with pride. Tonight, that changed. I mattered, and I always had. Before going to bed, I checked on the candle one last time. It was almost done, but the flame still burned strong, refusing to die down completely. I watched it for a moment, then turned off the lights around it, leaving only that small glow. My son and daughter-in-law came back in, laughing softly. He kissed my cheek goodnight. She hugged me, saying she'd see me in the morning. I nodded, wishing them rest. As they went upstairs, I sat back down by the table, just me and the candle, both still burning quietly. The night deepened outside. A soft wind moved through the trees, and the garden shimmered faintly under the moonlight. I thought of Mama's words again, how families are like gardens, needing tending and patience. I whispered another prayer of thanks, not asking for anything this time, just gratitude. The candle's flame flickered low, but it didn't go out. I rested my head on my arms for a moment, closing my eyes. I wasn't tired. I was full of memories, love, and the kind of quiet peace that feels like home finally exhaling. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. My daughter-in-law was coming down for water. She saw me at the table and smiled sleepily. I told her to go back to bed, but she sat with me instead. She looked at the candle and said softly that she wanted to learn Mama's recipes one day. I told her I'd teach her all of them. Her eyes brightened. I realized that's what the next chapter of my life would be. Not fading out, but passing on. I wasn't done yet. I still had stories to give. We talked a little more, our voices low and gentle. She asked if I ever missed the past. I said no, not really. The past was what shaped us, but living there too long keeps you from growing. She nodded, understanding. The flame flickered between us again, a bridge instead of a barrier. She squeezed my hand before heading back upstairs. I watched her go, feeling a pride that didn't come from control, but from connection. The kind of pride a teacher feels when the student begins to understand the lesson on their own. When she was gone, I sat back in the quiet again, the clock ticking softly behind me. The candle was almost gone now, its flame smaller but steady. I thought about all that had happened, the shove, the hurt, the letter, the healing. It all felt distant now, like another lifetime. I smiled to myself, whispering, "You were wrong, child. I still matter." The flame danced once, like it heard me, and then steadied again. I let the warmth wash over me, knowing the fire would keep burning, as long as I kept choosing to tend it. The next morning, sunlight broke through the curtains, soft and golden. The candle had burned itself completely out during the night, leaving only a tiny pool of hardened wax. I picked up the empty holder and smiled. Some lights are meant to pass their glow forward. My son came downstairs, stretching, his hair messy from sleep. He asked if I'd been up all night. I told him I just stayed long enough to watch the light finish its work. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant, even without needing it explained. My daughter-in-law came down soon after, her hair wrapped in a scarf, face fresh and calm. She offered to make breakfast, and I let her. The kitchen filled with the scent of butter and toast. She moved around the counters confidently but respectfully, glancing at me for approval every now and then. I gave small nods, and she smiled each time. Watching her cook, I realized something beautiful. This wasn't my kitchen anymore, and that was okay. I wasn't losing it. I was sharing it. The fire had spread, and it looked good burning in her hands too. We ate together again, sunlight washing over the table. The house felt open, like every corner had exhaled the past. My son poured me more coffee, then leaned back in his chair, saying he hadn't seen me smile this much in years. I told him maybe that's because it took losing peace to remember how much it mattered. He nodded, quiet. My daughter-in-law reached across the table and took my hand. "You do matter," she said softly, and this time, I believed her completely. Not out of pity, but because the words came from real change. After breakfast, I stepped outside to the porch. The air was cool and sweet. The garden glistened with dew, tiny sprouts taller than before. I walked slowly along the path, my feet sinking softly into the damp earth. Every flower, every leaf felt alive again. I whispered to myself, "We made it." It wasn't just about the garden. It was about everything. The house, the family, the pain, and the healing. I bent down and pressed my hand to the soil. It was warm, pulsing faintly, like the heartbeat of something reborn and grateful to keep going. When I stood, I noticed something shiny by the porch steps. It was Mama's old brooch, shaped like a small flame. I hadn't seen it in years. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The metal caught the light, glowing faintly in the morning sun. Maybe she'd dropped it when she left, or maybe it had found its way here on purpose. Either way, It felt like a gift. I pinned it to my dress and smiled, knowing Mama didn't need to be in the house anymore. She was everywhere I looked. I heard footsteps behind me. My son came out, holding a mug of tea. He stood beside me, quiet, watching the garden. He said he'd been thinking about everything that happened and wanted to do better, not just as a son, but as a man. I told him he already had. Growth doesn't always look like big moments. It's in the quiet ones, the ones no one sees. He smiled and nodded, setting his mug on the railing. I rested my hand on his arm, proud in a way that words could never fully carry. The mail truck passed again, the same one that had brought the letter. It stopped briefly at our box, then rolled on. I walked to check, half expecting nothing. Inside was another envelope, this one blank, except for a small mark, 3 tiny dots at the bottom corner. My stomach fluttered. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single blank page, clean and untouched. No words, no message, just space. And somehow I understood. The story was finished. There was nothing left to fix. No more lessons to learn, just life, waiting to be lived again, fully and freely. I took that blank page and slipped it inside the family album between the oldest and newest photos. It didn't need writing. It belonged as a symbol of new beginnings. My daughter-in-law came up behind me, peeking over my shoulder. She smiled and said it looked perfect there. I nodded. The past and present had finally met on the same page. She closed the book carefully, almost reverently, then placed it back on the table. We both stood there a while, just looking at it, both understanding something quiet and unspoken about what family really means. As the day went on, we started cleaning together again, not out of obligation but joy. My son fixed the loose cabinet door. My daughter-in-law rearranged the pantry. I wiped down the counters, humming one of Mama's hymns. The air was light, easy. We even opened the windows to let the breeze in. It carried the smell of the garden and something else, maybe cinnamon, maybe memory. Whatever it was, it made the house feel alive in a way I hadn't felt since my husband passed. Peace had finally unpacked its bags and decided to stay a while. By afternoon, the house gleamed. My daughter-in-law suggested we hang new curtains in the kitchen, bright yellow ones. I agreed. She smiled like a little girl, happy I approved. My son teased her about her taste, and she threw a towel at him playfully. Watching them laugh, I felt the kind of joy that sneaks up on you, the quiet, steady kind that feels earned. I turned off the stove and leaned against the counter, soaking it all in. The kitchen wasn't a battleground anymore. It was a home again, filled with warmth instead of pride. Later that evening, I lit a new candle and placed it on the table where the old one had burned. My daughter-in-law watched me do it and asked what it meant. I told her it was tradition now, each flame a reminder to keep kindness burning, no matter how small. She smiled and said she'd light one too when she had a home of her own someday. I told her that's exactly how the fire keeps spreading. She hugged me tightly then, the kind of hug that closes a chapter without words. My eyes stung, but it was joy. As the sun set, the house filled with golden light. I stepped onto the porch again, the evening calm wrapping around me like a soft blanket. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the kind of beauty you can't hold, only feel. My son joined me, carrying 2 cups of tea. We sat side by side in silence, watching the last bit of daylight fade. I told him his grandmother would be proud. He nodded, saying he hoped she knew that. I smiled and said she always did. Some things don't need proof to be true. The first stars began to appear, faint but clear. My daughter-in-law came outside with a small plate of cornbread wrapped in a napkin. She placed it on the railing, saying it was for Mama. We all stood there quietly, watching as the breeze picked up slightly. The napkin fluttered, but the cornbread stayed. I imagined Mama smiling somewhere, satisfied that her lesson had landed. I whispered, "Thank you," to the wind. The night air carried it away, soft and certain. Maybe that's how gratitude works. It doesn't stay, it travels to where it's meant to be. We stayed on the porch until the crickets grew loud and the sky deepened. The house behind us glowed warm through the windows. My son told me he wanted to repaint the living room soon. Maybe a light cream color to make it brighter. My daughter-in-law said she'd plant flowers along the front path. I smiled, knowing these weren't just chores. They were acts of claiming, of keeping life moving. Families heal not by standing still, but by building again. I rested my hand on the railing, feeling the cool wood under my fingers, grounding and real. When we went inside, the candle still burned, its flame steady. The air smelled faintly of honey and wax. I walked to the table and watched the flame for a long time. The warmth reached my skin, gentle and sure. I thought about every word Mama had spoken, every lesson tucked into her silences. She hadn't come to fix me. She'd come to remind me that I didn't need fixing at all. I whispered softly, "The fire's safe now." The light seemed to flicker brighter for a second, like an answer from somewhere unseen but near. Night fell deep and still. I made my way upstairs, the floor creaking softly beneath my feet. My room was tidy now, curtains drawn open to the moonlight. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the folded letter on my nightstand. I didn't need to open it again, but I couldn't bring myself to put it away either. It was part of me now, like breath or memory. I brushed my fingers over it gently, smiling through quiet tears. It was no longer a message from the past. It was permission to live forward. Before lying down, I said a small prayer, not for strength, not for forgiveness, but for continuity, for the courage to keep passing warmth down the line, just like Mama and her mother before her. The words came easy, no hesitation. When I finished, I turned off the lamp and let the moonlight do the rest. The soft glow fell across the floorboards, silver and calm. Somewhere downstairs, the clock ticked, marking another hour alive. That sound, steady and certain, felt like the purest sign that everything was exactly as it needed to be. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come right away. My mind drifted to Mama's stories, my husband's laughter, my son's childhood, and even that moment of hurt that started it all. I saw it differently now. It wasn't an ending, it was an opening. Pain had cleared space for truth, and truth had made room for love. Every memory linked like beads on a string, forming something whole. I smiled in the dark, whispering one last time to myself, "You still matter." The words didn't sound like defiance anymore. They sounded like peace. Morning light poured into the house again. The smell of coffee rose from the kitchen, mixed with the faint sweetness of leftover cornbread. I got up slowly, my joints creaking but not complaining. My son and daughter-in-law were already moving about, talking softly. Laughter drifted up the stairs. I took my time getting ready, brushing my hair, pinning Mama's brooch to my blouse. When I came down, they greeted me with warm smiles. My son kissed my cheek and said breakfast was ready. My daughter-in-law handed me a plate. Everything about it felt brand new. We ate together once more, sunlight flooding the kitchen. The walls seemed brighter, the space bigger somehow. My son asked if I wanted to plan a family dinner this weekend, invite the neighbors too. I agreed, laughing at how he was already making a guest list. My daughter-in-law said she'd handle dessert. I looked at them both, my heart full. This wasn't about fixing old wounds anymore. It was about building new stories, the kind that come from love that's been tested and still chooses to stay, the kind that lasts, the kind that burns steady. After breakfast, I stepped outside again to water the garden. The sprouts were taller, greener, full of promise. I touched one gently, feeling the softness of life under my fingers. My daughter-in-law joined me, holding 2 mugs of tea. We stood there quietly, watching the sunlight warm the soil. I told her every garden has its seasons, times when things die back, and times when they bloom again. She said she understood now. I smiled and said that's all I ever wanted, to be understood, not obeyed. She nodded, her eyes glistening with soft gratitude. The sound of the distant bell returned one last time, faint but clear. I paused, tilting my head to listen. It didn't sound like warning or mystery anymore. It sounded like completion. My daughter-in-law heard it too and smiled, saying it was beautiful. I told her it always had been. We just hadn't been quiet enough to hear it before. The breeze brushed past us, gentle and kind. I could almost feel Mama's presence in it, proud and peaceful. I whispered, "We did it, Mama." The bell faded slowly, leaving only calm behind. I walked back inside, leaving the door open so the light could follow. The house felt different now, not younger, not newer, but balanced. My son was fixing something under the sink, humming the same tune Mama used to hum. My daughter-in-law began setting the table for lunch, already comfortable in her rhythm. I stood in the middle of it all, realizing this was the real inheritance, the ability to keep going, keep loving, keep building. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling that same quiet fire still glowing inside me. I went to the living room and picked up the family album again. I opened it to the blank page we'd added and smiled. It looked right, sitting there between generations. I took a pen and for the first time wrote something on it. Respect is taught in silence, but lived out loud. The ink bled slightly into the paper, permanent and strong. I closed the book and pressed my palm over the cover, sealing the words like a prayer. The story was complete now, not just mine, but ours. It would stay that way forever. That evening, as the sun sank low and the house quieted again, I sat on the porch one last time. The air was cool, the world still. I looked toward the garden, now alive and shining in the fading light. The candle flickered in the window behind me, its glow faint but sure. I smiled, whispering to myself, "The fire's still burning, and I knew it always would, not just in this home but in every heart that learned what it means to forgive, to stand tall, and to remember that age never erases worth. It only deepens it."